Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We are taking a really fascinating look at the decline of traditional religion in the modern world. Now, historically speaking, this rapid decline, happening over just a few generations, is completely unprecedented in human history. But we aren't just looking at this as some simple end to devotion. Instead, we're going to explore this as a profound psychological mystery. You see, as traditional faiths recede in many parts of the globe, the deeply human energy that fueled them, it hasn't just evaporated into thin air. It has actually gone somewhere else.
So what happens when traditional religion loses its authority? This is the core question we need to unpack today. For thousands of years, almost everything, from why the harvest failed to why a loved one fell ill, was explained through a religious lens. It was literally the complete scaffolding for human existence. As humans, we inherently want our lives to have meaning, our actions to have direction, and our suffering to have some kind of significance. We desperately want to belong to a larger cosmic order. Historically, religion provided this massive framework. But when that framework fractures, what exactly fills that enormous vacuum?
The psychological need for the sacred doesn't disappear. It simply relocates. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is the real twist in the research. The individual might stop believing in traditional gods, sure, but they immediately begin investing that exact same psychological energy into other, purely secular domains. Secularization, it turns out, doesn't actually eliminate religion at the psychological level at all. It just changes its address.
To truly wrap our heads around this, we have to look at what we'll call the God-shaped anchor. Human beings need way more than just basic biological survival, right? We need more than just food, shelter, and reproduction. Eventually, we have to ask, what is my life actually for? The God-shaped anchor is something larger than the individual that provides orientation and makes life intelligible. Think of it like a giant compass when you're lost in a vast, dark forest. It doesn't have to be a supernatural being. Psychologically speaking, it can be absolutely anything that functions as an ultimate reference point totally beyond your own ego.
Let's break down exactly what this anchor does, because it performs 5 incredibly vital functions. First up is direction. It gives you a North Star, preventing your life from becoming just a chaotic sequence of competing, momentary desires. Second is ethics. It establishes those clear, non-negotiable lines between right and wrong. Third is identity, and this is absolutely crucial, because belonging to a larger whole is biologically and psychologically necessary for us. It keeps us grounded and connected. Fourth is meaning. It provides a narrative that makes sense of really difficult things, like sacrifice, loss, and hope. And finally, transcendence. That's the reassuring feeling that reality is just larger than your immediate personal interests. When traditional faith fades, every single one of these psychological needs remains completely intact.
And this brings us to an incredibly important insight inspired by the psychologist Carl Jung. He noted that the human psyche contains powerful forces that can operate outside conscious awareness. If a traditional religious symbol loses its authority, all of that pent-up psychological energy will desperately seek a new object. Historically, we see that when a societal belief system collapses, this unconscious energy finds a new target almost instantly. This is what we call the transfer of the sacred. You might walk around fully believing you're entirely secular and rational, while unconsciously reproducing a rigid religious structure right in another part of your life.
We see this transfer happen most often with things like politics, wealth, science, and nationalism. But we have to be very clear here. The crucial issue is not the object itself, but our psychological relationship to it. Politics is not inherently religious. Science is an empirical method, not a faith system. Wealth is just a tool. These things only become psychologically problematic when they're elevated from being just important human concerns into absolute objects of devotion.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when we map political ideology onto religious structures, the overlap is just striking. A political platform can suddenly function as an ultimate truth, providing this comprehensive, unquestionable explanation of reality. Ideological criticism is no longer just a healthy debate over policy, it literally becomes psychological heresy. And the political community splits the entire world into a strict binary of believers versus unbelievers, complete with its own rituals, symbols, heroes, and even its own sacred texts.
Because of this structural swap, defending a political ideology can feel exactly like defending one's own identity. Let that really sink in for a moment. This perfectly explains why modern ideological conflicts are so intensely emotional and so hostile. When you challenge someone's politics,
Well, if they've made it their sacred anchor, you aren't just critiquing a tax policy or a social program. You are actually threatening the very psychological structure that gives their entire life meaning and stability. We see the exact same migration of the sacred when we look at nationalism. A nation can easily become far more than just a political territory. It transforms into a sacred community. The individual begins to owe it ultimate loyalty. In fact, if you look back, many early nation-states deliberately co-opted religious rituals. They turned church hymns into national anthems and saints into founding fathers, all to unify people. Suddenly, flags, anthems, and military rituals acquire this symbolic, quasi-religious significance that perfectly fills the void left by traditional worship.
Now, to be clear, there's absolutely nothing inherently wrong with a love of country. A healthy civic identity creates wonderful, necessary solidarity among us. But the danger arises when loyalty to the nation eclipses truth, justice, or humanity itself. That right there is a psychological trap. It's when the finite nation is mistaken for an ultimate, unquestionable absolute, basically justifying any action in its name.
And this brilliantly illustrates how this exact same psychological mechanism applies to our next secular domain, wealth and status. In the modern world, money frequently shifts from being a simple instrument of exchange into the central organizing principle of existence. I mean, checking a stock portfolio multiple times a day can almost look like praying with a rosary. When this happens, a profound shift occurs in the human mind. The deep existential question of what should I do with my life, subtly, almost invisibly, degrades into how much am I worth? It ends up measuring human value entirely through income and possessions.
This gives rise to what we can call the secular priesthood. Your career ceases to be just a job. It becomes a secular priesthood where you seek ultimate validation. The workplace transforms into a literal temple of achievement, complete with its own hierarchical clergy. And the accumulation of wealth becomes this ritual that never actually reaches completion. Modern hustle culture acting a lot like a modern crusade. Again, prosperity isn't the problem here. The problem is allowing an external metric of success to become your absolute, sacred source of identity.
Then we have the modern religion of progress, which is centered heavily on technology. Science itself is, of course, just a method of testing and observing. But scientism, which is this exaggerated faith in technological progress, imagines technology as humanity's ultimate savior. We even use terms like tech evangelists to describe its biggest promoters. But there's a fundamental limitation here. Technology can absolutely extend human power, but it fundamentally cannot provide the wisdom on how to use that power. It just cannot answer questions that are ultimately ethical or spiritual. Perhaps the most dramatic substitution happens in the political or social sphere when a charismatic leader is elevated into a secular god. This occurs when a human being completely ceases to be evaluated rationally. Instead, they become a vessel for collective projection. To put it simply, collective projection is when a massive group of people unconsciously take all their own unresolved hopes, fears, and frustrations, and they just dump them onto one single person. The leader is then imagined as uniquely capable of saving the entire community.
This is exactly why followers of such leaders often forgive blatant contradictions, massive failures, or even outright cruelty. The leader has acquired sacred significance. You see, personality cults are sustained by this profound psychological projection, not just rational political calculation. The leader isn't really a politician anymore. Psychologically, they're the anchor holding the followers' worldview together. If the leader falls, the follower's reality totally shatters.
All of these examples highlight a really profound unconscious trap. It's so easy to look at others and see this happening, but the most dangerous part of this transformation is that it usually happens to us without us even noticing. A person can proudly reject organized religion, fully believing they've escaped dogma, while unconsciously organizing their entire existence around another absolute. Freedom from one God simply does not guarantee freedom from unconscious worship.
So the crucial point is this. One can become an idolater without believing in idols. The object of worship changes, sure, but the underlying psychological structure remains completely intact. Merely removing traditional religion from your life does not automatically produce psychological maturity. If you aren't paying close attention, you'll just hand your sacred energy over to the loudest secular cause in the room. It's like getting swept up in endless algorithmic outrage on social media, treating literally every trending topic as a holy war. This brings us to the ultimate challenge of modernity. The goal isn't necessarily to return to traditional religion, nor is it to cynically eliminate every form of commitment or value from our lives. We desperately need values. The true challenge is becoming conscious of the psychological forces that religion once organized. We have to actively and deliberately examine the things to which we hand over our ultimate authority.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because ultimately, the sacred cannot simply be deleted. It must be consciously directed. A mature individual doesn't live without devotion. Instead, they become incredibly aware of what they are devoted to and exactly why. Secularization didn't mean the disappearance of the sacred, it just meant its redistribution.
So I want to leave you by turning this lens inward. I'm going to ask a few questions, and I want you to really sit with them. It's time to look past whatever labels you use to describe yourself, whether that's atheist, believer, capitalist, socialist, or scientist, and ask the deeper questions about your own psychological center. What do you organize your life around? What are you unwilling to question? What ideologies, goals, or structures in your life have become so sacred that criticizing them feels like a direct attack on your very identity? What, if taken away, would make your entire existence completely lose its significance? How you answer this reveals your true psychological center far more accurately than any declared beliefs you might hold. Ultimately, the deepest form of personal growth begins when we can look honestly at our own lives and ask this final, provocative question. What have I unconsciously made into my God? Because only after becoming conscious of that answer can you begin to decide freely and responsibly what is actually worthy of your devotion. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions.